Hi everyone, welcome to the first episode of the Climate Psychiatry Alliance podcast. I'm Mario Nájera, a medical student from Guatemala and part of the Climate Psychiatry Alliance early career. Today, we got an amazing guest who's not only a pioneer in her field, but also someone who's not afraid of advocating for what she believes in, Dr. Robin Cooper. She's a clinical psychiatrist with over 40 years of experience in San Francisco, an associate professor at UCSF, and the co-founder and president of the Climate Psychiatry Alliance. Dr. Cooper has spent her career tackling mental health effects of the climate change, especially on vulnerable communities. Before we dive into our main topic, let's get to know Dr. Cooper a little better. Dr. Cooper, welcome to the show.
I am delighted to be here. I'm really honored that I'm the first on this podcast series, so that's a very special place to be, and I welcome this conversation.
It's fitting that you are our first guest, Dr. Cooper. We're thrilled to have you. So, to kick things off, can you share the most interesting place you've traveled to and what made it memorable?
Well, given that I'm not young and that I've traveled to a number of places, although I'm not the biggest traveler now because I'm so concerned and worried about the carbon footprint of long distance traveling, I have seen and been to a number of wonderful places. International travel is, of course, exciting, but there is amazing beauty and places right here within the United States. And I've traveled to many of the national parks, and it reminds us of what is so important to preserve. Specifically, I'm going to bring up just one place that's memorable to me, and that's when I traveled to Vietnam. And of course, Vietnam was a very important part of my youth advocacy. You say I'm not afraid to advocate. Well, I was very involved in the anti-Vietnam War activities, so it was quite memorable to visit Vietnam years later when there is no longer that animosity to Americans, although there was a great deal of shame for me in visiting that country. But I think what's memorable about it and so connected with our topic is when I was in the Mekong Delta and in those southern parts of Vietnam. And we traveled on the river. The river is a very active area for commodities and for exchange, and also other activities in southern Vietnam. What was memorable, or maybe I don't even want to remember it, is what is not known well enough is the environmental destruction that is happening in that Mekong Delta, which is considered the breadbasket for that region. This is an area for rice development, and there is both intrusion of sea level rise, which is bringing salt water in, doesn't yet have the profound impacts on restricting agricultural development of rice, but it will. And the other thing that horrified me was the massive amount of plastic waste and plastic bags just everywhere. And I asked one of our guides about it, and he said, well, agriculturally, people had grown up with the idea that you could throw your waste into the fields and it would degrade. Your banana peels, whatever. And they've just continued that practice of discarding things. And plastic waste in the Mekong Delta is really going to destroy that area. So those are some of my memorable moments of traveling.
Thank you for sharing that experience. I can relate, as in Guatemala, we have a big plastic waste problem, which poses significant environmental challenges. In fact, the Rio Las Vacas, a tributary of the Rio Motagua, has been a major source of plastic pollution flowing into the Caribbean Sea. The Ocean Cleanup Project has been working on this issue by deploying an interceptor, which has already intercepted over 1.4 million kilograms of trash in a single evening. These efforts are part of a broader initiative to prevent plastic from reaching the ocean. Sometimes it amazes me how people just don't know about this.
The unconsciousness really has to be addressed.
It sounds like these experiences really shape your journey. Can you share more about your background and what got you interested in climate psychiatry?
Well, my background, it's just been addressing issues in the interface of the social, political, the areas of injustice, has just coursed through my blood since I was it probably is inherited from my family who were activists, but I was always involved in had my thumb in or fingers into something growing up, whether it was what we called then the civil rights movement. I know that's old language, but we call that social justice and racial issues now, but it was the civil rights movement. Then in college, the anti-war movement. I was rattled when I found out about the nuclear weapons issues, and that was very, very early in my medical school, and got very involved in the anti-nuclear activities. And
that must have been huge. Yeah.
Those were huge. And when I found out about the nuclear weapons threats, it was profound, and it became very reminiscent of when I found out about the climate crisis and the impacts on climate. They resonated in me in similar ways. And then, when I had kids, it was more difficult to be so intensely involved, but I always had my fingers in some form of usually election activities. But as those election cycles, and when I'd work on a candidate or a cause during an election period, I'd be so relieved at the end of the election and say, "Oh, now I can go back to my life." But it was around, I'm not quite sure when. It might have been shortly after Obama was elected. I'm not quite sure, but it coincided. I had just read Bill McKibben's first or very profound article on what's the math, or it something like, what's the math, or some title like that. And I went to a demonstration, and I ran into some people who I knew who were leafleting specifically about climate change in a particular organization that they worked with. That was Citizens Climate Lobby. It was at the very beginning of that organization's foundation. And so McKibben's article, and then listening to these people who I knew and going to some meetings. As I said, it was like when I found out about the nuclear weapons threat, and I could not leave it alone. I said, this is not something you can just address on an election cycle calendar. And I could not put it down. It rattled me. I said, if I know about this, I have to do something about it. And the first several years that I got involved, I toyed around with several organizations, both Citizens Climate Lobby and 350.org, to try to find where I should belong and what I could do. And it emerged over time. I was very involved with Citizens Climate Lobby, and then through them said, I need to use my health voice, because that's where I can be most effective. It's something that I know about. It's close to what I do. So I joined the Citizens Climate Lobby Health Action Team. And much to my shame, during the course of my learning about or hearing people talk about the health impacts of climate change, there would always be some kind of tagged on thing at the end of somebody's talk. Oh, by the way, there are some mental health impacts. Okay. And I thought, oh my goodness, Why aren't we speaking about that? Why aren't we owning it? Why aren't we psychiatrists in the leadership of this? And the psychologists were leaps and bounds ahead of the psychiatrists at that point. So with that, I cannot for the life of me remember how I found and got connected with others, like-minded psychiatrists who also felt we need to do something and own this issue and bring to both our profession and the public the information about the mental health and specific psychiatric issues that relate to climate change. And the rest is like, I've been involved up to my eyeballs in climate and mental health and climate psychiatry since.
Dr. Cooper, your journey is incredible and inspiring. Is that when you co-founded the Climate Psychiatry Alliance?
I am a co-founder.
Yeah.
But this is not something I carry on my shoulders alone. As I said, I can't remember how I bumped into the other 10-ish people throughout the United States who were like-mindedly appalled and felt we needed to bring something together. Other people probably have a better memory of that, but we began to meet and talk about what we could specifically do to influence our specific profession and then make alliances with other mental health and health groups, and then also, of course, the broader ones, but to use our understanding of mental health and psychiatry. And we were particularly focused on the need to develop relationships through our professional organizations, the American Psychiatric Association, primarily because we knew we were pipsqueaks. Who's going to listen to us? No one, we don't have any way to reach people or be paid attention to.
I'm glad that they hear you.
Well, we knew we had to work and advocate and bring along an uninformed professional organization at that particular point in time. And I have to say that the American Psychiatric Association has made significant 180-degree turn. And also, I want to acknowledge the American Academy of Community Psychiatrists. Wonderful, like-minded people, and got the idea right away. And of course, also the work that's going now in mobilizing the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatrists.
These joint efforts are truly inspiring. Your work is making a big impact, and it's fantastic to see how you're inspired by other great organizations. It's good to know that your voice is being heard and that these collaborations are truly driving real change.
We take incredible pride in how far we've come within our profession and in bringing the voice and understanding of mental health to a broader sphere of the public. But I take pause in too much congratulations, because the real work of working with our professional areas is to have an impact on the profound damage that's going on to climate change and environmental degradation. We are a tiny, tiny piece of a very, very big problem and part of the puzzle and connection with many groups to try to turn that around.
You're right. We need more than just one change. We need many. Building a community to tackle this problem is crucial. As the current president of the CPA, what are your main goals or initiatives to help us address and mitigate the impact of climate change?
It's a big deal to be called president, but I don't do this alone. I am deeply, deeply work with our steering committee, which would be more officially called the board of directors, but our steering committee that navigates what we should be doing in our arena in a joint collaborative way. And we run with the commitment to participation of everyone. That being said, I also do the nuts and bolts on an everyday way of keeping the organization together. If we're talking about our goal, it goes back to our primary mission in bringing our particular expertise to the conversation to both educate and advocate for things that will bring some solutions to this, what we call this wicked problem. Particularly right now, our organization has a series of working groups. And I think all of the steering committee members that are involved in leading these groups should be rightfully proud of the work that they're doing. Education is, of course, core, and how we think about education, both from youth and young people all the way up to those who are envisioning health careers, to medical students, to residencies, to postgraduate education. And as I said, the broader public are deeply committed. And in regards to education, I just want to bring to attention a major project that we have through the Climate Psychiatry Alliance, and also in partnership with our sister groups, the Climate Psychology Alliance North America and Climate Psychology Alliance, as a supporter group, not necessarily co-sponsor of the project. Climate Psychology Alliance, United Kingdom. The Eco-Psychopedia. It's a big mouthful, so you can nickname it Eco-Psy. But that is an attempt, and we're just at the beginning stages of creating a kind of vast compendium of available information, free, online, easily accessible, written in everyday language so anyone can understand it, a kind of like a Wikipedia of mental health and climate change. So that's one of the projects that we're working on now, and very much in line with our educational mission, so that information is readily available. But I don't really care if people just know something, if they don't put to use what they know for a important purpose. But so education, and again, embedding information about climate, mental health, and psychiatry into the overall directions of trying to get health embedded in healthcare, education, and curriculum across the board. Many ways of working in that area. The other ways of promoting education is a lot of talks, grand rounds, talking to departments. I'm going to be speaking to the residency training group in emergency department next week. Over and over, there are a zillion of those to influence that educational process. And then again, it doesn't matter if we know something if we don't use it. And so the other really important area is advocacy. And one of our working groups is outreach and advocacy, in attempting to integrate the issues of climate and mental health. Specifically, that group is working on state legislative and governmental levels, and they have a wonderful template and wonderfully led project in that regard. Of course, concerns about vulnerable populations goes through everything we do, and that would have to do with impacts on children, elderly, pregnant women, and of course, race and poverty. If there is anything that there is to be concerned about diversity, is race and poverty are the central determinants of who bears the greatest burden. And that's true both from an international perspective. I don't think many in North America even know, whoa, there is a global South. There are people who are bearing the brunt to this much greater, and I know you know about that.
Yeah, you're right, Dr. Cooper. In Guatemala, we recently had the worst ever heat wave, with temperatures hitting 43 Celsius which is approximately 110 Fahrenheit in some parts of the country. This extreme heat has been tough on our communities, showing just how urgent climate action is.
And massive, massive things just recently in Brazil, and deadly, deadly heat in India last week. And Africa is,
oh, yeah.
I mean, we could
right?
just, there's no end to empathy, but there has to be empathy in the service of addressing that. And of course, domestically in the U.S., poverty, race are the determinants. So we tend to focus on that and all, at least in our thinking about what we're doing. And some of that work comes through mobilizing activities again with the professional organizations, because they have more muscle than we do. Yeah. But they're also have huge hierarchies. We can be pretty nimble.
That's really interesting. And you're right, advocacy and outreach are so important. So I want to ask you a big question now. How does climate change specifically affect mental health?
That is a really, really big topic. It is the scope of the field that we are attempting to address and bring to light in what I call that eco-psychopedia, eco-psy compendium. There's a vast, wide field. And it's, I think in the general public, most people would think, oh, that must have to do with how bad I feel about the world that we're living in. It must be, oh, my eco-anxiety, eco-distress. And I don't want to downplay that as a particular area of climate mental health. That's very important, but it's been the subject of a lot of popular media attention. But the scope of the mental health, brain, psychological issues in regards to climate change is vast and much beyond our conversation today. But definitely impacts on heat and the impacts on brain and behavior and cognition and sleep and the increase in violence and suicide with heat. And of course, the vast field of disaster response. And there's no way that we can ignore the psychological, mental health, mental well-being impacts from living through disasters, both the acute impacts and also post-traumatic stress and depression, the vast impact on the degradation of our environment and how we experience that. The experiences that we're having now with wildfire and air pollution, so intricately connected with climate change, and not solely driven by climate change. The field is big and it continues to expand, and the content is well beyond what we can talk about now, Mario.
I could not agree more. You're right. The environment is perhaps on the biopsychosocial presentation of any patient or any human being.
There are colleagues who have talked about expanding that to the biopsychosocial eco or biopsychosocial climate or ecological. And there have been early people who have presented that, and it is sure on our radar to really think in that multi-leveled way.
Absolutely, Dr. Cooper. It's incredible how much the field has grown and how crucial it is for everyone to understand these connections. Could you share any significant insight, experience, or even some findings you've had with CPA?
I am not a researcher myself, but if there's anything, I mean, when I came to this work, and it wasn't all that long ago, the field was much, much more limited. And the expansion in both scientific publications and research and literature has just massively exploded. So one of the things that I think I want to address just in findings is how the field of climate psychology and the vast realm of that has just exploded. And it's really hard to keep up with all of the literature at this point. That's importantly successful. The other thing that has surprised me is how often when I talk to someone, and I always say it, what do you do? What do you do? I say, well, I'm a psychiatrist, but I spend most of my time doing climate mental health.
Yeah.
Climate impacts and mental health. Most people, oh, that's interesting. I never thought about that. And then when I mention a few of the things that I have just now to you, people are shocked. Oh, I didn't know about that. So that's one of the things, because once I feel like I know something, I figure everybody else in the world knows it. But it has been a surprise to see how limited the general public is in regards to the specifics about this, even though I simultaneously say that the literature and the attention has exploded. And I've also been pleasantly surprised when people indicate that they're curious about it. Well, I don't know if that curiosity, when I chat with the man on the street or at the grocery store or wherever, goes beyond being politely curious with me, or whether it stimulates some greater tickling of their career curiosity. But I do think that those are things that I've noticed.
Well, that's amazing. Like, I wonder what does it feel like when someone opened their eyes and it's like, wow, I didn't know that. That must truly feel amazing. So let's talk now about challenges. What are the challenges that you have faced addressing the mental health impact?
The challenges are not just about the mental health impact. The challenges go back to the massive challenges that we all face around really the drivers, addressing the drivers of this horrific, we call it global warming, climate crisis. None of the words really come close to really addressing what we're facing. And they become, I think, over time, euphemisms. The challenge is to be profoundly aware that we live and we are all integrated in a world that is dependent and embedded in the use of fossil fuels. We cannot get away from the contradictions that many of the lovely things that we have and the advances in our particular society derive out of the fossil fuel use. But we have to face the music. It is no longer benign. It is destroying us. It is choking us. And it continues to be driven by the fossil fuel industry and those connected with that, with the constant need for more and more profits. So the biggest challenge is managing the power issues in relation to what is a David versus Goliath fight around getting off of fossil fuels. That's not to say that challenge, which is enormous, that we have not had massive strides and achievements. The speed at which we now have understandings and capacities for clean energy transition, for some technological solutions, for some policies that address the downstream impacts on vulnerable populations. There have been enormous strides. But the biggest challenge is what my dear colleague Dan Bernstein has charmingly referred to is fossil use a addiction disorder. This is an international global issue. How we embed and use the issues around mental health in the stories and the information that connect the use of fossil fuels to the reality of the profound health damaging impacts and then the mental health impacts. So our challenge is to use our professional understanding and our status as healthcare providers to use our voice and make sure the public and policyholders know this is a health challenge because health matters to people.
This is a monumental task and also a monumental problem. Fossil fuels are at the heart of the issue on our energy supply, especially in countries like Guatemala, where we heavily rely on them. We haven't have fully adapted clean energy or renewable energy sources yet. How do you think we can address this challenge?
We know how to provide energy without it being fossil fuels. I mean, not me, but the people who develop the technology around that.
No, you're right. Yeah,
I know how to turn on my solar energy.
I wish I had solar energy at my home, but currently it's a little expensive here in Guatemala. But I have heard that Costa Rica is making great strides towards clean energy. I hope other countries follow that.
It's not just a matter of hoping other countries, it's also domestically and internationally.
Oh, yeah.
It is expensive. And so policies have to be available to make that happen.
You're right. And that brings me to my other question. How can local governments and healthcare providers better prepare to support mental health during the climate crisis?
Every single level of government has a role in this component. Every community can have an impact. Someone said once, every job is a climate job now. I will say at this moment in time, because we are facing elections, every election is a climate election of some sort. There are enormous numbers of policies and projects at local areas, at state levels, at national government levels. And it is our task and it can go from electrification of buildings or EV vehicles, or in my particular area of California, we had a legislative bill that required setbacks so that oil refineries could not be within a certain district of schools and churches and communities. That was an important legislative victory, but I will tell you, it is funded now by the fossil fuel industry and being challenged on our election to overturn that. If anyone in any of their communities can find many, many, many policies that relate to this, or electrifying school buses, or the vast number of decaying schools throughout the entire United States, and I believe it's probably true in many places, where the infrastructure and the buildings are just not built for this level of heat. And so schools become ovens that are endangering children and impairing their learning during extreme heat or air pollution. It is our job as mental health professionals to indicate for all of those things across the border how these policies, the issues that we are trying to correct through any particular policies, impact health and mental health, and why these policies are essential from a health and mental health perspective to add weight to those advocacy efforts.
Voting is so important for our future. Let's make environmentally conscious decisions. No matter where you are listening from, this is vital.
Voting and protecting democracy in the U.S. and other democratic countries which are being threatened now, is essential, because only through successful democracies can we have an impact on our governments and policies and regulations. And who sets those regulations and who guides the ways of responding? Voting is, as I say, voting is a climate action.
And I couldn't agree more with that.
And we know that the challenges to fair voting and active engagement in voting is so important. And we also know that as many people will respond to surveys that they're very concerned about climate change and anxious about it, we also know that, at least in the United States, climate change is not a issue that voters identify on how they will vote. So there is a discord there. But the issues of voting is a whole conversation in itself, and actually one that I will be devoted to a particular evening webinar for the Climate Psychiatry Alliance.
Local governments need to integrate mental health support into their climate action plans, and healthcare providers should be trained to recognize and treat climate-related stress and anxiety. Community programs and educational campaigns can also raise awareness to build resilience. It's amazing to see how much we can achieve when we work together, live together, and overall act as a community.
You're giving me the entree, tickling me to not forget about how engagement and activism and working side by side with others in a connection is so important to engaging around climate change, but also to be able to modulate and manage our own really big feelings around knowing what we know and facing what we know, so that the development of what we call personal resilience and community resilience around mental health is fundamental to being able to tolerate the understanding and the feelings we have, and also to actually do something effectively with others. And although there's a bill in the U.S. Congress addressing some funding resources for community resilient projects, it is so essential. And it is absolutely essential just at the granular level, neighbor to neighbor. Who's that old person down the road?
Yeah.
What do they need during an extreme heat? Are they safe? What do your neighbors know together about who needs what and who's going to have the resources for a potential disaster, the next hurricane that's going to come? How do we do that neighbor to neighbor? It can't all happen at a government level.
Yeah, individual resilience is just as important. So, how can we build personal resilience against the mental health impacts of climate change?
Another huge topic. And of course, we know that those who have been exposed more to difficulties in their lives and come to facing this with a history of trauma, life circumstances, and what we call with children ACEs, adverse life experiences, are those who are going to be rattled in some ways. And sometimes they're even people who have lived through adversity, have great internal resilience themselves. But it also means, how do we provide people with actual skill-based and ways to manage tolerating some of this? And there are many guidelines to this on the Climate Psychiatry Alliance website. Under resources somewhere, there's coping with anxiety, climate distress, managing the amount of exposure to media, being able to be selective, informed, but not binging in a way that's consuming. How do we make sure we take care of ourselves so that we have the energy and resilience talking with others, developing support systems, and that can be in many ways. One vehicle is climate cafes, which offer a safe place for talking just about the feelings. Developing what is a part of a broader field of managing distress through mindfulness activities, regular exercise, things that we call lifestyle, and we're very connected with the group that's developing on lifestyle in the field of psychiatry. Knowing, and this is not for everyone, you got to do the things that work for you, but knowing that attachment and connection and exposure to nature can be a very healing, calming experience. So taking a deep breath, walking through the woods in urban settings, finding those little small neighborhood parks. For acute anxiety, knowing ahead of time how to do deep breathing, which actually regulates the sympathetic nervous system. I tell my patients, I know it sounds dumb, but the way you learn how to calm yourself through breathing is really, really effective. It's not, and it doesn't cost any money, and it's with you every moment of your life. You can always, but that means practicing those skills, not when you're in a snit, but ahead of time. And of course, diminishing loneliness, diminishing isolation, being connected in supportive communities is so profoundly important.
Yeah,
I'm sure there are things I left out. I am absolutely sure there are things I left out.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a big question, so thank you so much for answering it.
As we wrap up this conversation, what advice would you like to give to people who want to get involved with climate psychiatry?
First off, as I said before, every job can be a climate job. That doesn't mean all of your job is. I mean, I'm not going to ignore the primary purpose that I have with my patients. I think about the way to involve oneself in a multi-leveled way. One, what we can do individually, how we comport our lives individually, or at that level, what we do with our patients in a clinical setting. And on our website, again, Climate Psychiatry Alliance, there is a particular tool that I developed for coping with severe extreme weather, how to survive extreme weather. There are resources there, how to deal with wildfire and air pollution. These are also vastly available on lots of websites, but those are just the ones on Climate Psychiatry Alliance. So I think about that at the individual level. Then I think at the next level, community. And that's what we do, individuals with community levels, but also then as healthcare professionals, what do we do in the organization of healthcare, in the institutions that we work in? How do we create and work in a sustainable way in the delivery of healthcare? And that's, again, a huge topic, and many organizations are working on healthcare system sustainability efforts. And then the most powerful, the one with the biggest muscle is how we use our trusted voice in the service of advocacy for policies, because it is at the big policy level also that we'll have the bang for the buck. So I think about those as many levels, and there are many ways to get involved. For us, join Climate Psychiatry Alliance. Psychologists, you're welcome. All mental health providers and allies are welcome to our organization. But Climate Psychology Alliance North America, and they're a partner in a program that we have on climate-aware therapists, develop skills and perspectives of working in the sphere with clients through the Climate Aware Therapist Project, other organizations. Climate Health Now is the California organization that works a lot on advocacy of legislation. The other organization I meant to say is Climate Mental Health Network, Physicians for Social Responsibility. There are many, many organizations.
I'll link each of these organizations in the episode notes so listeners can engage with them. Thank you so much, Dr. Cooper, for your time.
I am always delighted to talk with you and to talk about this issue. I hope it's been useful.
It has been absolutely useful. I think this was a great conversation. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to this podcast brought to you by the Climate Psychiatry Alliance. Remember, every small step towards sustainability and mental health awareness makes a difference. Stay connected, stay informed, and let's work together for a healthier planet and healthier minds. Until next time, take care.